Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I want to talk about the Atlanta Falcons and why I believe they are one of the most dangerous and underrated teams in all of football. Now, the last time we talked about the Atlanta Falcons on this channel, it was a breakdown of the quarterback Desmond Ridder being a young guy coming in after Marcus Mariota, getting in those 4 games, and I really broke down his tape. Now, after this video, that is something you may definitely want to check out because I titled the video, Why the Falcons Don't Need Lamar Jackson. And we saw in the controversy. Now, of course, now Lamar Jackson has signed with the deal for the Baltimore Ravens, but at that time, in the point in time, it was debated whether the Falcons should go all in trying to get a guy like Lamar Jackson when they have a lot of weapons in that room, when they have one of the best offensive lines in football, and would that be a move that's one move away, being electric in the city of Atlanta? Lamar would have been loved in that city, but when you have to give up the draft compensation, when you have to pay that money and hang on to a guy, it's kind of, we have to have something else. They went a different route, and I believe in having the guy they have now, Desmond Ridder, and they also have Taylor Heineke, as you can see by the depth chart. I think that Desmond Ridder has a little more there. Now, is he going to be an elite quarterback? That's something we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to start off with the offense, but before we get into that, I have some housekeeping I want to get into. What to expect. My film breakdown series where we go over team-specific offensive and or defensive units. Episode 5 is coming out tomorrow. Now, as you guys know, college student here had to deal with some finals and things of that nature, so we really got lapsed in the process, but now we're back on the right schedule, on the right track. And I got a really interesting team that's coming out for tomorrow, so you're going to want to be here for that film breakdown. But let's talk about why the Atlanta Falcons are dangerous. One of the most underrated teams in football in the NFC South. And I think the biggest thing for me is looking at the teams in that division. We got the Carolina Panthers, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we got the New Orleans Saints. We have some teams in this division. There's some pretty competitive teams, some pretty young teams as well, trying to turn it around. Now, before I talk about the offense, I have to talk about the coaching staff, and that's our Arthur Smith. We know what he's done with the Tennessee Titans, and we look at Dave Ragland, what he's done with the Chicago Bears, with teams like that, and now he's here. So I think the biggest question for me, and a lot of people want to know about Desmond Ridder, can he be the guy? Now, it's crazy because when I talk about Desmond Ridder, I'm a guy. I see a precise guy. I see a guy who has the decision making. Now, the biggest thing for me is, and what I saw in those 4 games, that sample size, working on that deep ball. I mean, when you had to fit it in a tight window, you did that. We know he runs the 4-5. He was mobile. He had the play action boots. He had the naked plays. He did all of that. But I want to see you be able to push that ball down the field because you have some weapons, and we're going to get into the weapons who can get down the field, who can catch the football. Now, looking at the offense, you of course lost some guys, and I look at the biggest thing I think about, Alameda Zaccheaus. That's a guy who you lost, and I think had a pretty solid connection with a young guy in Desmond Ridder, being one of the older guys in a pretty young receiver room, and I really liked him. Now, with this, can Desmond Ridder in a full season, can he do it? Now, you got a Bijan, you got Kyle Pitts, you got Mac Hollins now, you got Drake London. And with Desmond Ridder, I think he's a leader. He has all of the intangibles, all of the off-the-field things. Now, training camp is coming up. We're going to talk about that as well. But the biggest thing, and I want to see it now, consistency. And that's accuracy, like I said, working on the deep ball, being able to do that. And also this coaching staff being able to develop a young guy. Now, Desmond Ridder's played a lot of football. He's not as young as the typical second-year quarterback, but the thing for him is using those weapons, being more of a point guard rather than a guy who's going to go out and get it himself. I want to see the scrambling. I want to see the read option, the play actions, the nakeds. I want to see that, but I want to see you distribute the ball in the intermediate and the short routes, and in that deep ball, when it's open, I want you to be accurate. Now, one thing I saw about Desmond Ridder coming out of college, it was his arm strength, and I don't think that plays as much into the deep ball as we want it to. Now, some of that's timing, and like I said, a lot of it is accuracy. Now, the good thing that we can bank on, and that I talked about in my film breakdown, Desmond Ridder loves Drake London. I mean, that could be something that Kyle Pitts wasn't there when Desmond Ridder came into play, but he loved Drake London, and he got his guy the football. I mean, scoring touchdowns, getting big-time gains, hitting him in stride for yards after the catch. I love that connection, and I think that's something we can look forward to Now, with Desmond Ridder, like I said, a lot of it is in his development, working on some of the things even that he struggled with coming out of college, working on some of those same things in the season, having a system that fits him with the coaching staff. Can they be patient? Can they work with him? I think he's a guy who can get it done. Now, when we talk about second contracts and is he an elite guy, I don't think so currently. But like I said, we're going to have to see that and work into that and talk about that. Now, getting into these weapons, because you say he has to succeed. If not him, it's going to be Taylor Heineke coming in because he's showing us he can do some pretty solid things with the Washington Commanders, having a Curtis Samuel, having a Terry McLaurin. But now, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Tyler Algier, who ran for 1,000 in his rookie year, Cordell Patterson, who can return, who can catch the football. Bijan can catch the football. I love the weaponry, and I think it's one of the best in the league now. With the receiving core, there's some question marks for me. Drake London, I do think he's a number one. I've saw enough football. Now we know coming out of college, he dealt with the ankle injury. And really for him, it's just about the targets, getting more targets, getting more familiarized with the quarterback. He hasn't had a consistent quarterback yet. So I think we can expect Drake London's best season coming up right here, right now. Now, Mack Hollins, a guy who I like. I cut on the film for the Las Vegas Raiders. He was the guy that popped off the screen for me. Saw a lot of him alongside of Devontae Adams, alongside of Hunter Renfrow when he was healthy. I like him. He can get down the field, a bigger body target. Now, you got Drake London, who's a bigger body target. You got Scotty Miller, who's a smaller target. And then you got Mack Hollins, who's a bigger body target. So I think these guys have skill sets who complement each other. And I'm looking at Mack Hollins probably being the guy who stretches the defense out. And like I said, Drake London, he can win contested catches down the field. But as far as pure speed, he's not really stretching the defense with his foot speed, burning defenses. But I do think in the intermediate, in the short, where him and Desmond Ridder, in that 4-game sample size, they had the connection. That's what I can be expecting on. That's what I'm really looking towards now. Scotty Miller, still fairly young in his career. Got, signed here, came from Tampa Bay, but can he be that slot guy? And we just want you to stretch the defense. Now, think about it. This is a team, and I watched film on the Atlanta Falcons. They run 13, they run 12 personnel. This is an old school, nasty, smash mouth football. And you brought in a Jonnu Smith who comes from that New England system, and he can kind of be that wing, he can be the fullback, and he can be the tight end if you want to flex out Kyle Pitts. So now, this offers us a lot of versatility, and I look at all of the things. Is Kyle Pitts going to be a big slot? Can he can line up in the X, he can line up in the Z, he can run that route tree. I mean, we've all saw Kyle Pitts. This is a freak unicorn of an athlete. Now, last year was a down season for him, and I think this year coming into it, we gotta get him involved because, like I said, this is a running identity. This is a team who likes to run the football, second in the NFL in rushing last year, second in rushing attempts last year. So this is not just yards. This is yards and attempts. So we have an identity already established, but we got guys who can get the football on the perimeter. So we look at all of this talent, and now what do we want to do with it? How can we spread the offense out more? And I think Dave Ragland, Arthur Smith, looking at those guys and what they want to do, like I said, this is the team who's going to run the football, but when you want to spread it out, when you want to give Desmond Ridder some more opportunities to use his mobility, to make easier reads, to be able to spot out the coverages because you're stretching these guys out. So now if we're sending motions, if we're doing all of these things, we can see what coverage you're in. If it's man, if it's zone, all of these little things. So now, I mean, the options are endless when I talk about this weaponry, when I talk about this weapon group, but we know the engine that drives the horse, and that's the offensive line. I love the offensive line. I love the big-time addition they made, and Matthew Bergeron was really looking at him. Played some tackle for Syracuse, but now he's coming in to play guard, run blocking. He has some things to clean up in pass blocking, but can that be cleaned up now that he's kicked inside to guard? We know some tackles are better pass protectors when they get kicked into guard, but his strength, he's going to move you. I think he's one of the best run blockers that came out of this draft, and that's highly speaking of him. But we have him with the Jake Matthews. We have him with the big-time money guy who just got paid. That's Chris Lindstrom. Now, we look at the center position, and I think with the center position, we can probably say, now, when I talk about offensive lines, and I say it always has to be the one guy who's kind of different from the rest, and that's Drew Dalman. Now, I'm not saying he's a bad center. I'm not saying he can't play great football. When we talk about the unit in this, of course, the other guys are going to make him better. He can work in unison and be in sync with his guys, talking about help, working against stunts, all of those things. But as far as that, this is a very strong offensive line. I mean, we look at Caleb McGarry, one of the better tackles in the NFL. Like I said, Jake Matthews, aforementioned him. Matthew Bergeron, he's a rookie, but he's going to come in, and that's establishing the identity. So all of these things about this offense, and I haven't gotten into the defense yet. And when I talk about why I believe the Atlanta Falcons are scary, it's because of the defense. Now, we say that this is a team who was at the bottom in stopping the run, but bottom in stopping the pass. Why can we be a defense that's one of the better ones in the NFL? How can we shift from worst to closer to first? I'm not going to say worst to first. That's a little bit far. But how can we shift from a disrespectable defense to somebody that guys are fearing to come into the Atlanta Falcons stadium? So, now, like I said, when I talk about these units in specific, it's all about the coaches for me and how can they work with the personnel. Now, you got a guy, Ryan Nielsen, and I talked about when I did the breakdown as well, all of this different things, all of the unique and exotic schemes and coverages and packages that we ran in New Orleans. This was a team. Now, you got some great personnel. You had Marcus Davenport last year. You got Marshawn Lattimore. You got all of these guys. Had some pretty good players, but when we want to be exotic, when we want to scare up the defense, when we want to stunt the defensive line, when we want to send pressure from ways you don't even know, Ryan Nielsen is that guy. Now, I'm expecting a physical team. Now, I don't know if they're going to match as much as I saw New Orleans match in New Orleans. Being one of the interesting teams because we don't see, of course, in the red zone, you know, the schemes and the routes and the rules are different in the red zone. So we see a lot of matching in the red zone, but they matched in first and long at the 20-yard line. So that was something I saw out of that defense. And how much of that will we do here, I don't know. But they're bread and butter. Man coverage. And I think you got some guys who can do that, some real dogs in this room. And you got a defensive line who I think is going to be better served to stop the run. But we want to see who are our pass rushers coming off the edge. Now, let's start with that front seven. That's the defensive line. We got Calais Campbell. At this point in his career, he's a veteran. He's going to offer you more in the run game than he will in the passing game. But I really like him. I really like a lot of what he does. And I mean, think about it. Coming from Jacksonville, going to Baltimore, understand, Baltimore didn't really want to let Calais Campbell go. We heard Jim Harbaugh, you never close the door on good players. And if he wanted to go back to Baltimore, he had options to do that. Now, Calais Campbell, I think the biggest thing with him understanding the type of guy he is, he wants to be a part of that shift, be a part of that rebuild. Like Tremaine Edmonds talks about with the Chicago Bears, he wanted to be a part of something. And I think this is something you're a part of now. Beyond that, we're going to have to see on the edge, but I think interesting enough because if we're running that 3-4, we got these bigger defensive ends, kind of these base defensive ends, and Grady Jarrett, a guy who used to play interior, but now he can also kick out and be that 4-eye, be that 4, be that 3, and he's kind of that bigger defensive end as well. So now, when we look at what we have here in our backups, Eddie Goldman, David Onyemata coming over from New Orleans. This is a guy Ryan Nielsen brought with him. But when I talk about that, I'm saying, and we don't have a lot of depth on the defensive line. Now, we got guys, of course, but I'm saying as far as top tier depth, that may be a question mark. But then I look at some of the guys, some of those linebackers, we get into passing situations, we can kick some of these guys inside. And now I want to really talk about that linebacker group because that's a Lorenzo Carter, because that's a Bud Dupree, because that's a Arnold Ebiketie. And I think that these are guys who could kick down if we want to be multiple. Ryan Nielsen said it. He literally said it in a press conference, we're going to be multiple. So you see base 3-4, but it's no base in the NFL no more. I hate to say it, but we run so many nickel, dime packages, sub packages. Base, we're matching up against the offense. Offenses are so high level. So now I talk about Lorenzo Carter being a guy, if he can stay healthy, if he can continue to do what he's doing on that arc. Now, I know some Atlanta Falcons fans are 50-50 on Lorenzo Carter, but I do like his upside at this point in his career, and I think he is poised to have a pretty good season. Now, with that being said, Bud Dupree, a guy who's dealt with big-time injuries, but last year for the Tennessee Titans, got some burn, kind of a restoration season for him, came over to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, what can he do at this point in his career? He's slated to be the starter here. Now, I think Arnold Ebiketie, and we got some guys behind those guys who can challenge. But overall, looking at it, we're going to stop the run with this front seven. I mean, that's talking about the outside linebackers, talking about the defensive ends and the defensive tackles. I really like those guys. Now, I want to get into the middle linebackers. And it's kind of interesting when talking about these middle linebackers because you have a Caden Ellis, a guy who came with Ryan Nelson. So we kind of see he's trying to imprint and implement his vision of what he had there. The New Orleans Saints were a top 5 defense last year. So we're hoping and praying the Atlanta Falcons can be top 10 at least. But with Caden Ellis, now these guys, him and Troy Anderson, I think Troy Anderson having the highest upside, of course, being a quarterback convert, being the guy who's freakishly athletic, who's also tall and just rangy and can do a lot of things at the linebacker position. But this would be my weak mark of this team. And I say that with kind of some sketchy optimism because I do think Caden Ellis, being a guy who's played a couple seasons in the NFL, but at this point, can he reach a different level? Now, when you're playing behind a Pete Werner, you're kind of mixing and matching and rotating behind him, a Demario Davis, a lot of linebackers, pretty talented linebackers for the Saints. Now, you're coming here, you're slated right here. Now, we have to see training camp, but you're kind of slated to be that guy besides Troy Anderson. And I think that these guys, they're kind of going to be shielded. Some of the weaknesses, talking about fluidness in their hips, being able to get the drops in zone coverage, I don't think that's really the strong point of this linebacker room. I think they can run and hit. And that's in the run game, in the passing game. Now, of course, if we have a lock call, if we have a bear call, a hug call, we have to cover a running back on a little flat route or something like that, we may can do that. But if we're talking about option routes, angle routes, man-to-man with tight ends, if we don't have safety help, we're kind of going to be in for a long day. So I want to see this and really kind of looking at Michael Walker, all of the guys in this room, a Tay Davis, a Dorian Etheridge. I really just have to see it in training camp. But like I said, some sketchy optimism for this group because there's some ceiling here and some guys who can pop. A Michael Walker can pop in this system with Ryan Nielsen. A Caden Ellis, a guy who's familiar with the system, so he kind of has the edge over these other linebackers. But I do like the group. I just would say compared to the group I'm about to get into, they're kind of the weakest one here. Now, this secondary. You went from arguably one of the worst secondaries in the NFL to this is your strong suit now. Now, the burning question. A lot of people want to ask questions about why do we get him? How do we get him? Did we get a steal? You know, he was a guy who was picked top 5 in the draft. Now he's here, had some struggles with the Detroit Lions, and that's Jeff Okudah. Now being an Atlanta Falcon, I'm going to tell you, you have to, I wouldn't say tamper your expectations, but understand he can play really good football and he can play really bad football. So it's really about him being consistent, having the consistency. And I think it's kind of a mindset thing, kind of a culture reset. Now, this is a team who I think is kind of establishing what kind of culture they want to build. But even with the Detroit Lions, they're still in the process of establishing that culture. So now, you bring him in, he's slated to start here, but I wouldn't say that's guaranteed. I like what Darren Hall did in that sample size that I saw last year. When we talk about AJ Terrell, I would say based on who you talk to, this is a fringe top 10 corner, maybe even higher in some regards, but I think he plays really good football. There's just a lot of great corners in the NFL, and Mike Hughes being a veteran in that room, D. Alford, Trey Flowers, another veteran in that room. Like I said, Clark Phillips being kind of the sneaky guy in this. Now, Clark Phillips, I think he's going to challenge. And that's being that slot corner. I talked about a team who's going to have sub packages, who's going to be multiple, who may particularly match in certain situations. So he's a guy who can do that. And I think that, you know, we see the draft status, we see the height. He's a dog. I watched him at the University of Utah, and he plays some really good football. Now, he's not going to, you know, fly off his screen with 40 time. He's not going to fly off his screen with vertical. And I think at the draft combine, he tested particularly poorly, so that's probably why he failed in some people's regards. But he was mocked in the first. He was mocked in the second. I don't know how he failed, but that was one of my steals in this draft. Like I said, I really kind of like you guys' draft. I love Bergeron. I like Phillips and some of the other guys. Zach Harrison being a guy who can challenge in that linebacker room. But based on what he did at Ohio State, I'm kind of seeing him challenge for that big defensive end, being a guy in that 3-4 multiple scheme. If he can do some of that, but also even on a rundown, first down, you know, short yardage, he can kick out, be that outside linebacker. He's athletic, but we look at Bud Dupree, we look at Lorenzo Carter. He's not that same type of guy. He's in a bigger body, in a bigger frame, and of course, he comes with more strength, but it's harder to move that laterally. Now, Richie Grant, Jesse Bates being top 5 safety in football. And I'm going to say that, you know, I think a lot of people can agree when I say that. Came over for the Bengals. You paid this guy some money. Now, at that strong safety position, Jalen Hawkins being kind of a young guy. Richie Grant, another guy who you have. Drafted DeMarco Hellams, who I really liked his film. Now, like I said, of course, when you draft a guy that, I wouldn't say that low, but in that range, He's a guy who has some things to clean up. But if he cleans that up, saw some really good football out of him. Now, Grant and Bates. These are the two guys, and Jalen Hawkins is going to get a lot of run in this room because of the sub packages. When we talk about that, I love it. I love the secondary. I mean, Okudah, if he can be consistent with this new culture. Jesse Bates, I don't have any questions about him. Rangy, can tackle all of these things, makes plays on the football with ball skills. Richie Grant, a young guy still developing, but can learn a lot from Jesse Bates. And we have to think about how that impact, how that veteran leadership can play into his development. So, like I said, I talked about this group. I love the secondary. I love the defensive line. Like I said, the secondary is the best group on this defense. I think we can all agree with that. The defensive line is a very good group compared to most. I wouldn't say it's elite, but I would say it's above average. I would say it's on the closer side to that good tier. When I look at that offensive line, I mean, I love the moves they made, bringing Eddie Goldman out of his one-year retirement. So many great moves, and to go back to the offense, so many great weapons. I don't have anything more to say. I mean, this is a scary team, and based on what we just talked about and what I've told you about this team and with this coaching staff and with the defensive minds and the offensive minds and Arthur Smith and kind of his vision, Bijan Robinson, Offensive Rookie of the Year candidate. I actually love the pick for what they want to do now. We look at the guys on the board at that point, and Tyree Wilson went before him. We look at Will Anderson. These guys were Jalen Carter. That was a guy. But when we look at David Onyemata, we brought him in, we brought in Eddie Goldman. We have to feel comfortable in what we still did at the interior of the defensive line. Now the edge, like I said, Lucas Van Ness was a guy who was in talks with this team. There were some guys who were in talks, but I think you took the best football player who's going to impact your team the most. Tyler Algier, Patterson, Bijan Robinson. I mean, Bijan even a guy who can flex out into the slot, catch the football. We still got Algier. We can run two-back systems. Like I said, we still love to run 12 and 13 personnel. And that's kind of recapping the team. Talked about Desmond Ridder. Now, I want you to check that breakdown out there because I know a lot of guys are banking on Desmond Ridder for this season. Most of the things that I can say with film analysis and backing that up with the film is in the video. So I want you guys to check that out here. That could be the next thing you watch after this video. If you love the content, don't forget to subscribe. We're getting closer to training camp. We're a month away, but we're closer. But we're far at the same time, so it's kind of sad. But like I said, what to expect, the series that we have going on here. We got a lot of good things rolling within the channel. Like I said, if you want to see the Desmond Ridder breakdown, check that out. We got some things going, but that's going to do it for today's video. And now, we out.